She played piano with the Mafia boss's blind daughter. Not knowing, he was watching them. Through the towering windows of the Santoro Estate's music room, late afternoon sunlight spilled across the glossy surface of the grand piano. Isabella leaned forward, her hand hovering near Alessandra's, as the young woman's fingers danced across the ivory keys. The melody of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the opulent space, each note floating like gossamer in the air. "That's beautiful, Alessandra," Isabella said softly. "Your touch is becoming more confident with each lesson." A gentle smile graced Alessandra's face as her unseeing eyes remained fixed ahead. "I can feel the music better now. It's like I can see through my fingers." Isabella watched as Alessandra's hands moved with growing assurance. Despite her blindness, there was an innate grace to her movements, a natural talent that needed only gentle guidance to flourish. The connection between them had grown stronger with each lesson, built on trust and shared passion for music. The heavy door creaked open. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as Marco Santoro's commanding presence filled the doorway. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, emphasizing his broad shoulders and powerful frame. But it was his eyes that held her captive, cold, calculating, and filled with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story, Alessandra's fingers stilled on the keys. "Father, is that you?" "Yes, cara mia." Marco's deep voice resonated through the room, though his gaze remained fixed on Isabella. "Don't stop playing. I've been enjoying listening to your progress." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine at his words. He'd been listening? For how long? The thought of him watching from the shadows made her skin prickle with awareness. Marco moved into the room with predatory grace, each step measured and deliberate. "Miss Moretti," he said, her name rolling off his tongue like dark honey. "You've done remarkable work with my daughter." "Thank you, Mr. Santoro," Isabella managed to reply, proud that her voice remained steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Alessandra is a natural talent." His lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But that's not the only reason I chose you, is it?" The air seemed to thicken with tension. Isabella's hands gripped the edge of the piano bench, her knuckles turning white. She could feel the weight of unspoken intentions in his words. "I don't understand," she said, though part of her did. The part that had noticed his lingering looks during their brief encounters, the way he always seemed to appear when she least expected it. Marco moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the intimate space. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more dangerous, wrapped around her. "I've been watching you, Miss Moretti. Your patience with Alessandra, your passion for music." He paused, his dark eyes boring into hers. "Your beauty." Alessandra sat quietly at the piano, her head slightly tilted, listening to the exchange with an unreadable expression. Isabella's heart thundered against her ribs. The Mafia boss's admission hung heavy in the air, charged with implications she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Every instinct told her she should be terrified. This man was dangerous, powerful, capable of unspeakable things. Yet there was something magnetic about him, something that drew her in despite her better judgment. He took another step toward her, and Isabella found herself unable to move, caught in his gravitational pull. "You're not just here for Alessandra, are you?" His voice was low, almost intimate, but carried an edge of danger that made her heart race faster. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft sound of Alessandra's fingers trailing absently across the piano keys. Marco's jaw tightened as he moved to stand behind his daughter, placing his hands on her shoulders with gentle care that contrasted sharply with his intimidating presence. "Alessandra," he said softly, "would you give Miss Moretti and me a moment?" Alessandra nodded, rising gracefully from the piano bench. A maid appeared at the doorway. They were always watching, always waiting, and guided her from the room. The door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo in the tension-filled space. Marco's expression darkened as he stared at the piano, his fingers trailing across its polished surface. "My daughter's blindness," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "It wasn't something she was born with. It was taken from her." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She remained seated at the piano bench, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "The Ricci family," Marco continued, spitting the name like poison. "They wanted to hurt me where it would cut deepest. They attacked my home when Alessandra was just a child." His knuckles went white where they gripped the piano. "The explosion. The doctor said the trauma caused permanent damage to her optical nerves." The pain in his voice was raw, real. Isabella found herself reaching out instinctively before catching herself, her hand falling back to her lap. "I should have protected her better," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should have known they would target her." His dark eyes lifted to meet Isabella's, and the intensity in them made her heart skip. "Do you know what I did to them, Isabella?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I destroyed them, every last one who was involved." His words were cold, clinical, but his eyes blazed with remembered rage. "And yet it didn't give Alessandra back her sight. It didn't erase my failure." Marco moved around the piano, his steps measured, deliberate. Isabella fought the urge to stand, to put distance between them. He stopped directly in front of her, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "I've watched you since before I hired you," he admitted. "The way you carry yourself, your dedication to your students, your beauty." His hand reached out, fingers ghosting along her cheek but not quite touching. "You fascinated me. When I learned you were also a gifted pianist, it seemed like fate." Anger flared in Isabella's chest, warring with the flutter of attraction she couldn't quite suppress. "You've been manipulating me from the start?" "I prefer to think of it as creating an opportunity." His lips curved into a dangerous smile. "You can't tell me you haven't felt this tension between us, Isabella. The way the air changes when we're in the same room." She wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. There had always been something there, an electric current that made her skin prickle whenever he was near. Marco leaned down, bringing his face close to hers. "You have a choice to make, Isabella. But before you make it, you should know. Getting involved with me could cost you more than just a job. My world is dangerous, and once you're in it, there's no easy way out." Isabella sat frozen, her mind racing. She should run. Every rational thought screamed at her to get up, walk out, never look back. But something deeper, something primal, kept her rooted to the spot. His eyes held hers, dark and possessive. "I don't share what's mine, Isabella. And you, for now, are mine." Isabella's fingers hovered over the piano keys, her mind wandering as Alessandra practiced her scales. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the music room, casting long shadows across the polished floor. 3 days had passed since Marco's confession, and each moment in this house felt charged with unseen electricity. "Your rhythm is slightly off," Isabella said softly, guiding Alessandra's hands back to position. "Try to feel the beat in your heart, not just your head." Alessandra nodded, her unseeing eyes fixed straight ahead. "Something's different about you lately," she said, her fingers pausing on the keys. "Your voice, it's tighter. Are you worried about something?" Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Of course Alessandra would notice. Her other senses were remarkably sharp. "I'm just tired," she lied, hating the taste of dishonesty. "Let's try that passage again." As Alessandra began to play, Isabella felt it, that familiar sensation of being watched. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and goosebumps spread across her arms despite the warmth of the room. She tried to focus on Alessandra's playing, but the weight of that unseen gaze was impossible to ignore. Finally she turned, scanning the shadows near the doorway. Empty. The feeling remained, though, heavy and intense, like a physical touch trailing down her spine. "Miss Moretti," Alessandra's voice pulled her back. "Did I make a mistake?" No, Isabella assured her, forcing herself to concentrate. "You're doing wonderfully. Let's work on the dynamics now." They continued the lesson, but Isabella couldn't shake her unease. Every rustle of curtains, every creak of the old house made her jump. She found herself glancing at the doorway more times than she could count, expecting to see Marco's tall figure looming there. The lesson stretched on, Alessandra's playing growing more confident with each repetition. Her face lit up when she mastered a particularly challenging section, and Isabella couldn't help but smile. Despite everything, these moments with Alessandra were pure, untouched by the darkness that seemed to permeate the rest of the house. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, Isabella gathered her things. "You've made excellent progress today," she told Alessandra, touching her shoulder gently. "Practice those exercises we discussed, and we'll pick up here tomorrow." The maid appeared, right on schedule, to escort Alessandra to her room. Isabella watched them go, then collected her sheet music and bag. The hallways were quieter at this hour, most of the staff having retired to their quarters. Her footsteps echoed against the marble floors as she made her way toward the exit. She turned a corner and stopped short. Marco stood there, his broad shoulders filling the narrow hallway, hands in his pockets. He looked deceptively casual, but Isabella knew better now. Nothing about Marco Santoro was ever casual. "I trust my daughter's lessons are progressing well," he said, his voice low and smooth like aged whiskey. Isabella clutched her bag tighter, willing her voice to remain steady. "Yes, she's very talented. Her dedication is admirable." Marco took a step closer, and Isabella fought the urge to step back. His presence seemed to fill the space between them, making it hard to breathe. His eyes, dark and intense, held hers as his lips curved into that knowing smile that made her pulse race. "If you ever need anything," he said, each word deliberate and weighted with meaning, "don't hesitate to ask. Anything at all." Isabella managed a small nod before turning away, her heels clicking rapidly against the floor as she walked toward the exit. She could feel his eyes on her back, that same heavy gaze that had haunted her all day. Her heart pounded in her chest. Fear and something else, something dangerous and thrilling, coursing through her veins. The invitation came unexpectedly during one of Alessandra's lessons. Marco's messenger, a stern-faced man in a black suit, delivered it with the gravity of a royal decree. Dinner. Tonight. With the boss himself. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her navy blue dress in the estate's grand dining room. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the mahogany table, which seemed to stretch endlessly before her. Fine china and sterling silver place settings gleamed, a display of wealth that made her feel even more out of place. "Please, sit." Marco's voice came from behind her, causing her to start. He moved like a shadow, silent and deadly, appearing without warning. He pulled out her chair, his fingers brushing her shoulder as she sat. A touch so light it might have been accidental, but Isabella knew better now. Nothing Marco Santoro did was ever accidental. The first course arrived, some delicate soup she couldn't name, and silence settled over them like a heavy blanket. Marco watched her, his dark eyes never wavering, studying every movement as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "How is Alessandra progressing?" he finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Very well," Isabella replied, grateful for the familiar topic. "She has a natural talent for music. The piano speaks to her in a way that—" "Like her mother," Marco interrupted, something raw flickering across his face. He took a long drink of wine, his knuckles white against the crystal stem. The main course arrived, perfectly cooked steak that Isabella could barely taste through her nerves. Marco's presence filled the room like smoke, making it hard to breathe. Yet there was something different about him tonight, something vulnerable in the set of his shoulders. "They came for her when she was 5, he said suddenly, setting down his fork. "My enemies, the Rossi family." His jaw clenched. "They couldn't get to me directly, so they—" He trailed off, his eyes distant with memory. Isabella sat perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. She'd heard whispers about Alessandra's blindness, but never the full story. "It was a message," Marco continued, his voice dropping lower. "They wanted to show me they could take everything I loved, that nothing was safe." His hand tightened around his wine glass. "I was in a meeting when it happened. By the time I got there—" He shook his head, and Isabella saw it. The crack in his armor, the guilt that ate at him daily. "The doctors said the damage was irreversible," he said, meeting her eyes again. "My daughter would never see again, and it was my fault. My enemies, my lifestyle, my failure to protect her." The weight of his confession hung in the air between them. Isabella could see it now. The man behind the monster, the father whose love for his daughter had twisted into something fierce and protective, and sometimes suffocating. "You can't blame yourself forever," she said softly, surprising herself with her boldness. Marco's eyes snapped to hers, sharp and intense. "Can't I?" When dinner ended, Isabella rose to leave, but Marco's hand caught her wrist. His touch was gentle, at odds with everything she knew about him. "Stay," he said, and it wasn't quite a command. "Please." They moved to his study, where a fire crackled in the hearth. Marco poured them both brandy, and gradually, the rigid set of his shoulders began to ease. He spoke of Alessandra's childhood, of teaching her to navigate the world without sight, of the first time she found the piano by herself, her small hands exploring the keys with wonder. With each story, another layer of his carefully constructed walls seemed to crumble. "I'm not a man to be understood, Isabella," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "But you make me want to be something better." The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the music room, casting golden patterns across the polished grand piano. Isabella watched as Alessandra's fingers found their position on the keys, her movements becoming more confident with each passing day. "That's it," Isabella encouraged softly. "Feel the rhythm in your hands." Alessandra's face lit up as she began to play, a simple melody at first, but one that carried emotion in every note. The sound filled the room, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. Isabella noticed how Alessandra's shoulders relaxed when she played, how the worry lines on her forehead smoothed away. From the corner of her eye, Isabella caught a glimpse of movement in the hallway. Marco, as always, hovering just out of sight. He did this often now, appearing like a shadow, watching their lessons from a distance. She'd grown accustomed to his presence, even found herself looking for him sometimes. "Your posture is perfect," Isabella said, gently adjusting Alessandra's wrist. "The music flows better when you're relaxed." A small smile played on Alessandra's lips. "Father says you've changed things here," she said suddenly, her fingers still dancing across the keys. "He says the house feels different now." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She glanced toward the doorway, but Marco was gone. "I'm just here to teach you piano," she said carefully. "No," Alessandra shook her head, her unseeing eyes somehow knowing. "It's more than that. I can feel it. Father's different when you're here. Less heavy." The words hung in the air between them. Isabella thought about Marco's confession at dinner, the weight of guilt he carried. She'd seen glimpses of tenderness in him, the way he always made sure Alessandra's favorite treats were stocked in the kitchen, how he'd installed additional handrails in the hallways without being asked, the soft tone his voice took when speaking to his daughter. Alessandra began a new piece, something more complex. Her fingers moved with growing confidence, creating a melody that spoke of longing and hope. Isabella watched in amazement as her student lost herself in the music, transforming from a sheltered, blind girl into an artist expressing her soul through sound. Movement caught her attention again. Marco stood in the doorway now, not hiding his presence. His eyes were fixed on Isabella, dark and intense. She felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch, sending shivers down her spine. The piece Alessandra was playing reached a crescendo, filling the room with haunting beauty. Marco stepped into the room, his movements silent despite his imposing presence. He watched his daughter play, and Isabella saw something soften in his expression, a tenderness that made her heart ache. This was the real Marco Santoro, she realized, not the cold Mafia boss, but a father who would do anything to protect his child. The final notes of Alessandra's piece faded away, leaving a charged silence in their wake. Marco moved closer, his presence making the air feel thick with tension. "That was beautiful, Tesoro," he said to Alessandra, his voice gentle. Then his eyes locked onto Isabella's, and the gentleness gave way to something else, something that made her pulse quicken. "You're more than just a piano teacher to her, aren't you?" he said, his voice low and intense. Isabella swallowed hard, feeling trapped between the truth she couldn't deny and the dangerous implications of admitting it. The electricity between them was undeniable now, crackling in the space that separated them. The evening shadows stretched across the mansion's opulent hallways as Isabella gathered her sheet music, her fingers trembling slightly. Another lesson had ended, but the weight of unseen eyes pressed against her back. She'd felt it all week, that constant heavy presence that made her skin prickle with awareness. Stepping into the corridor, the click of her heels echoed against marble floors. There he was, exactly where she'd expected him to be. Marco Santoro stood in the shadows, his dark suit blending with the dimness, those penetrating eyes fixed on her every move. Something inside her snapped. Maybe it was the tension of the past weeks, or perhaps it was the way he made her feel both scared and safe at the same time. Isabella stopped, squaring her shoulders. "Why do you keep watching me?" Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Every lesson, every moment I'm here, you're always there, lurking in the background." Marco stepped forward, the dying sunlight casting sharp shadows across his face. His movements were predatory, measured, like a wolf closing in on its prey. But there was something else there too, something that made her breath catch. "You think I don't have reason to watch everyone in my home?" His voice was cold, controlled, but his eyes told a different story. "Especially someone who spends so much time with my daughter?" Isabella lifted her chin. "We both know this isn't just about Alessandra." A muscle ticked in his jaw. He moved closer, and Isabella fought the urge to step back. The air between them crackled with tension. "No," he admitted, his voice dropping lower. "It's not." The confession hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Isabella's heart thundered in her chest as Marco's gaze swept over her face, lingering on her lips before meeting her eyes again. "You're not like the others," he said, each word deliberate and weighted. "And that's why I'm watching you." Heat bloomed in her chest, a mixture of frustration and something else, something dangerous. "What does that mean? What do you want from me?" Marco's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something softer in his eyes, something that made her breath catch. "You challenge me," he said quietly. "You don't cower. You look at me and see more than just—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Just what? A monster? A mafia boss?" Isabella's voice shook slightly. "Is that what you think I should see?" His eyes darkened. "It's what everyone sees. What they should see." "Well, I'm not everyone," Isabella snapped, her frustration boiling over. "And I won't be intimidated by your brooding presence in every shadow." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "No," he murmured. "You won't." The intensity of his gaze became too much. Isabella turned away, her heart racing, her thoughts a jumbled mess. She started walking, her heels clicking rapidly against the floor as she tried to put distance between them. The corridors seemed endless, the elaborate decor blurring as she passed. Something made her stop, made her turn around. Marco stood where she'd left him, still watching. The distance between them stretched like a physical thing, but his gaze was heavy, magnetic. Isabella stood her ground, refusing to look away first, even as her pulse quickened under his scrutiny. They stayed like that, locked in a silent battle of wills, the air thick with unspoken words and dangerous possibilities. Isabella felt it then, the inexorable pull, like being drawn into the eye of a storm. She knew she should run, should break free of whatever this was, but her feet remained rooted to the spot, caught in Marco Santoro's gravitational pull. The evening had settled into a peaceful rhythm as Isabella walked with Alessandra down the mansion's hallway. Their footsteps echoed softly against the marble floors, Alessandra's hand resting gently on Isabella's arm for guidance. The piano lesson had gone well, and Alessandra's smile lit up her face as she talked about the new piece they'd been practicing. "I think I'm finally getting that middle section," Alessandra said, her unseeing eyes bright with excitement. "The way the notes flow together." A sudden screech of tires cut through the quiet, followed by angry shouts from outside. Isabella's heart jumped into her throat as Alessandra's grip tightened on her arm. More voices joined the first, harsh and threatening. "What's happening?" Alessandra whispered, her face pale. Before Isabella could respond, heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. Marco appeared, his usual composed demeanor replaced by cold fury. In his hand, a gun gleamed dangerously in the dim light. His eyes swept over them, assessing, calculating. "Inside, now." His voice brooked no argument as he ushered them into Alessandra's room. "Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone but me." Isabella guided Alessandra to sit on the bed, her own hands trembling slightly. Marco moved with deadly precision, checking the windows, drawing the heavy curtains. The sounds outside grew louder, the thud of bodies, the crack of what might have been gunshots. "Father?" Alessandra's voice quavered. Marco's expression softened for a moment as he touched his daughter's cheek. "It's all right, Piccola. I'll handle this." His eyes met Isabella's, hard and intense. "Keep her safe." He barricaded the door behind him, leaving them in the tense silence of the room. Isabella could hear everything, the pounding of fists, Marco's voice cutting through the chaos with harsh commands, the sounds of violence that made her stomach turn. Alessandra's fingers found Isabella's hand, squeezing tight. "This happens sometimes," she whispered. "People who want to hurt Father, to hurt us." Isabella wrapped her arm around the girl's shoulders, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. Outside, someone screamed in pain. Marco's voice rose again, cold and terrible. She could imagine him out there, all his careful control transformed into calculated violence, minutes stretched like hours. Isabella whispered soothing words to Alessandra, her heart racing with every new sound from outside. Gradually, the violence subsided, replaced by the murmur of voices giving orders, the sound of cars driving away. When the door finally opened, Isabella's breath caught. Marco stood in the doorway, his pristine suit torn, knuckles bloody. His hair was disheveled, and a dark bruise was forming on his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Still fierce, but exhausted, carrying a weight she hadn't seen before. "It's handled," he said simply, moving to Alessandra first. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, murmuring soft words in Italian that made her relax. Then his attention turned to Isabella. She couldn't look away from the blood on his hands, the evidence of what he was capable of, what he would do to protect what was his. When their eyes met, something shifted in his expression. A crack in his armor, a moment of raw vulnerability that made her heart stutter. "This is my world," he said quietly, his voice rough. "And you? You're now part of it, whether you want to be or not." The morning light filtered through the grand windows of the Santoro mansion, but it did nothing to dispel the heavy atmosphere that had settled over the estate since last night's violence. Isabella's fingers trembled slightly as she arranged the sheet music for Alessandra's lesson, her mind replaying the sounds of fists and Marco's commanding voice. She couldn't shake the image of him standing in the doorway, bloodied and fierce, yet somehow more human than she'd ever seen him. The contradiction made her head spin. "Miss Isabella?" Alessandra's soft voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you ready to begin?" Isabella forced herself to focus on her student, but even as she guided Alessandra's hands over the keys, she felt it, that familiar weight of being watched. She didn't need to turn around to know Marco was there, lurking in the shadows of the music room. His presence had become something tangible, like a physical touch against her skin. "Remember to keep your wrists relaxed," Isabella instructed, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened. "Let's try that passage again." Alessandra's fingers danced across the keys, but Isabella's attention kept drifting to the corner of the room where she knew Marco stood. The music seemed to fade into the background as awareness crackled between them like electricity before a storm. "Your timing is improving," Isabella said to Alessandra, but her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. She could feel Marco's gaze burning into her, studying every movement, every expression. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in. Alessandra played on, oblivious to the tension surrounding her. Her face was serene as she lost herself in the music, but Isabella felt like she was drowning in unspoken words and dangerous possibilities. "That's wonderful progress," Isabella managed to say, as Alessandra finished the piece. She reached for another sheet of music, but her hands weren't steady. The papers scattered across the floor, and she quickly bent to gather them. "Let me help," Alessandra offered, but Isabella gently stopped her. "No need, I've got them." She collected the sheets, acutely aware of Marco's presence growing closer. The air seemed to thicken with each step he took toward her. The lesson continued, but Isabella felt like she was moving through water, every gesture slow and deliberate. Marco's presence was overwhelming, filling the room with an energy that made it hard to breathe. She tried to focus on teaching, on the simple mechanics of piano playing, but her mind kept circling back to last night, to violence and protection, to the way Marco had looked at her with those tired, intense eyes. When the lesson finally ended, Alessandra's maid came to escort her to lunch. Isabella began packing up her things, her movements mechanical, as she tried to ignore the fact that she was now alone with Marco. She heard his footsteps approach, measured and deliberate. The sound seemed to echo in the now quiet room. When she finally turned to face him, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. He moved closer, and Isabella found herself backing up until she felt the piano against her back. Marco stopped just inches away, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, mixed with something darker, dangerous. "I told you," he said, his voice low and intense. "You're mine now." His eyes held hers, refusing to let her look away. "And that means I protect you, just as I protect everything that belongs to me." The evening shadows stretched across Marco's study as he led Isabella inside. The room was a fortress of dark wood and leather, filled with the subtle scent of cigars and expensive whiskey. Isabella's heart raced as Marco closed the door behind them, the soft click echoing in the silence. He moved to the drink cart, his movements precise and controlled. "Whiskey?" he asked, not waiting for her answer before pouring 2 glasses. Isabella watched him, noting how his shoulders carried an invisible weight. The events from the previous night had left their mark, not in bruises or cuts, but in the way he held himself, like a man carrying a burden too heavy to share. "I need you to understand something," Marco said, handing her a glass. His fingers brushed against hers, sending a shiver down her spine. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a long, jagged scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow. This was from the night they took her sight. Isabella's breath caught as he continued to show her more scars, one across his ribs, another on his shoulder. Each mark told a story of violence, of battles fought in the shadows of his world. "I killed 3 men that night," he said, his voice hollow. "But I was too late. They'd already—" He couldn't finish the sentence, his jaw clenching with suppressed rage and grief. The study seemed to shrink around them as Marco moved closer. His eyes, usually so cold and calculating, now held a raw pain that made Isabella's heart ache. She could see the father beneath the monster, the man beneath the mask. "Every morning," he continued, "I watch her navigate this house with her hands on the walls, and I know it's my fault. My enemies didn't target her because of anything she did. They wanted to hurt me, and they succeeded." He turned away, staring out the window at the gathering dusk. His silhouette was strong, powerful, but Isabella could see the slight tremor in his hands as he raised the glass to his lips. "I've built walls around us both since then, kept everyone at a distance, because the moment you let someone in—" He trailed off, his knuckles white around the glass. Isabella stood, moving closer to him. The warmth from his body seemed to pull her in like gravity. "Is that why you watch us during the lessons?" she asked softly. "To make sure she's safe?" Marco turned to face her, and the raw vulnerability in his expression made her breath catch. "At first," he admitted. "But then I saw how you were with her. You don't treat her like she's broken. You see her strength just like I do." His confession hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Isabella could feel the shift between them, like tectonic plates moving beneath their feet. This wasn't just about Alessandra anymore. It was about the walls Marco had built, and how they were slowly crumbling. "I failed her once," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I won't fail her again. And now—" He looked at Isabella, his gaze intense. "Now I have two people to protect." The admission cost him. She could see it in the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides. This powerful man, this feared Mafia boss, was showing her his deepest wounds, trusting her with his greatest weakness. Isabella stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Without hesitation, she reached out and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm, rough with calluses, the hands of a man who'd fought his way through life. "I'm here, Marco," she said softly, feeling his fingers intertwine with hers. "I'm not going anywhere." The night air crackled with tension as Isabella stood at the window of Marco's study. Her fingers traced patterns on the cool glass, her mind wandering to the way Marco had opened up to her earlier. The estate grounds stretched out before her, peaceful under the moonlight, but that serenity was deceptive. A commotion outside drew her attention. Car headlights swept across the driveway, and angry voices shattered the quiet. Marco materialized beside her, his body rigid with tension. Gone was the vulnerable man from hours ago. In his place stood the cold, calculating Mafia boss. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice hard as steel. But before he could move, the study door burst open. One of his men, face tight with urgency, rushed in. "Boss, it's the Ricci family. They're demanding to speak with you." Marco's jaw clenched. "Bring them to the courtyard." Isabella's heart pounded as Marco turned to her. "You should see this," he said, his eyes dark. "You need to understand what my world really is." She followed him through the mansion's corridors, her steps echoing against marble floors. The courtyard was lit by harsh floodlights, creating deep shadows where Marco's men waited, weapons ready. 3 men stood in the center, their stance aggressive. The leader, a man with silver-streaked hair and cruel eyes, sneered as Marco approached. "Santoro," he spat, "your time is coming to an end." "Ricci," Marco's voice was ice, "you dare come to my home?" "We came to deliver a message." Ricci's eyes flickered to Isabella, and his smile turned predatory. "Getting soft, Santoro? Taking in strays?" Marco moved so fast Isabella barely saw it. In one fluid motion, he had Ricci by the throat, forcing him to his knees. The other 2 men reached for their weapons, but Marco's guards were faster, disarming them with brutal efficiency. "You think you can threaten what's mine?" Marco's voice was terrifyingly calm. "In my own home?" Isabella watched, frozen, as Marco demonstrated exactly why he was feared. His movements were calculated, each blow precise. He didn't just fight, he dominated. The violence was cold, methodical, a display of power that left no doubt about who controlled this territory. When it was over, Ricci lay bleeding on the ground, his men unconscious beside him. Marco hadn't killed them. No, this was a message, just as they had intended to deliver one to him. He crouched beside Ricci, speaking low enough that Isabella had to strain to hear. "The next time you think about coming near my family, remember this moment. Remember how easily I could have ended your life." Marco's men dragged the 3 away, leaving dark smears on the courtyard stones. The night seemed to hold its breath as Marco finally turned to Isabella. Blood stained his knuckles, and his suit was impeccable save for a few wrinkles. This was the man she was falling for, capable of both tenderness and terrible violence. He approached her slowly, as if afraid she would run. His face was a mask of cold indifference, but when their eyes met, something softened in his gaze. For a brief moment, she saw the man who had shared his guilt with her, who loved his daughter so fiercely it hurt. "You can leave at any time, Isabella," he said, his voice rough. "But I know you won't. You're already too deep in this world." Isabella's fingers hovered over the piano keys, watching as Alessandra practiced the new piece they'd been working on. The melody floated through the grand room, soft and melancholic, matching her troubled thoughts. Her eyes drifted to the doorway where Marco often stood, watching their lessons. Today, he wasn't there, but his presence lingered everywhere in the mansion. In the armed guards that patrolled the grounds, in the expensive artwork that lined the walls, in the very air she breathed. She couldn't escape him, even when she tried. "You seem distracted today," Alessandra said, her fingers pausing on the keys. Despite her blindness, she had an uncanny ability to sense emotions. "Is everything all right?" Isabella forced a smile, though Alessandra couldn't see it. "I'm fine. Let's continue with the piece." But as Alessandra played, Isabella's mind wandered to earlier that morning. She'd seen Marco with his daughter in the garden, his usual cold demeanor completely transformed. He'd been describing the roses to Alessandra, guiding her hands to feel their petals, his voice gentle and patient. The tenderness in that moment had made her heart ache. The sound of a wrong note brought her attention back to the present. "Sorry," Alessandra apologized. "I lost my place." "It's okay," Isabella assured her, placing her hands over Alessandra's to guide them back to the correct position. "Let's start from the beginning." As they worked through the piece, Isabella couldn't help but think about how different Marco was with his daughter. The man who could order deaths without blinking, who had beaten those men in the courtyard just days ago, became someone else entirely around Alessandra. And increasingly, she noticed, around her too. The door creaked open, and Isabella's heart skipped. Marco stood there, his dark suit impeccable as always, his eyes finding hers immediately. The intensity of his gaze made her look away quickly, focusing instead on Alessandra's playing. "That's beautiful, Tesoro," Marco said to his daughter when she finished the piece. His voice was warm, proud. Alessandra beamed at the praise. "Isabella is an excellent teacher." Marco's eyes never left Isabella. "Yes, she is." The weight of his stare became too much. Isabella stood abruptly. "I think that's enough for today, Alessandra. You've made excellent progress." She gathered her things quickly, trying to maintain her composure. She needed to get out, to put some distance between herself and Marco before she lost herself completely in whatever this was between them. But Marco followed her into the hallway. "Running away, Isabella?" She stopped, her heart pounding. "I'm not running. I just need to go home." "Look at me." His voice was soft but commanding. When she didn't turn, he moved closer, the heat of his body radiating against her back. I said, "Look at me." Slowly, Isabella turned. Marco stood too close, his presence overwhelming. His eyes searched her face, seeing too much, understanding too well. "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I see the way you look at me." He stepped closer, backing her against the wall. "You're mine and you know it." Isabella tried to pull away, to escape the magnetic pull of his gaze, but it was impossible. She was caught, trapped between the solid wall and Marco's unyielding presence, between her fear and her desire. The attraction she'd been fighting blazed between them, impossible to deny any longer. The evening had started innocently enough. Isabella was finishing up her lesson with Alessandra when Marco's men flooded into the mansion, their faces grim. Within minutes, the grand dining room transformed into an impromptu meeting space, filled with men in expensive suits and cold expressions. Marco had insisted she stay. "You need to understand what you're part of now," he'd said, his hand possessive on the small of her back as he guided her to a seat beside him. The air crackled with tension as Isabella observed the gathering of dangerous men around the ornate table. Their conversations were coded, careful, but she understood enough. The Ricci family was making moves against Marco's territory, threatening everything he'd built. "They're testing our defenses," a man with silver-streaked hair said, his Italian accent thick. "The shipments at the docks were a distraction," Marco cut in, his voice sharp as steel. "They want us looking east while they move west." Isabella tried to make herself invisible, but she felt their calculating glances. She was an outsider here, and they all knew it. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. She was Marco's weakness, and in their world, weakness meant vulnerability. Marco's hand found hers under the table, his grip tight, grounding. The gesture surprised her. Such open displays of connection weren't like him, especially not in front of his men. But there was something different about him tonight, an edge of possessiveness that both thrilled and terrified her. "The Ricci family is getting bold," another associate spoke up. "They remember what happened with Alessandra. They think you've gone soft, Marco." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Marco's fingers tightened around Isabella's hand, and she felt the barely contained violence in his rigid posture. The mention of Alessandra's attack was still a raw wound. "Let them think what they want." Marco's voice was deadly quiet. "It will be their last mistake." The meeting continued, strategies discussed in hushed tones. Isabella watched Marco in his element, commanding, ruthless, calculating. This was the man everyone feared, the one who built an empire on blood and violence. Yet she'd seen another side of him, glimpses of tenderness when he was with Alessandra, moments of vulnerability when they were alone. As the men filed out, Marco held her back. "You understand now?" he asked, his dark eyes searching her face. "This is what you're choosing to be part of." Before she could respond, one of Marco's men burst into the room. "Boss, we have a problem. The Riccis, they're moving." Everything happened too fast after that. The sound of breaking glass shattered the night's silence. Gunshots echoed through the mansion. Marco's men sprang into action, weapons appearing from beneath expensive jackets. "Get her out of here," Marco barked orders, pushing Isabella toward one of his trusted guards. But in the chaos, something went wrong. The guard fell, red blooming across his chest. Strange men in black tactical gear swarmed the room. Isabella felt rough hands grab her arms. She fought, but they were too strong. Through the chaos, she caught Marco's eyes. The look on his face. She'd never seen such raw fear there before. "Isabella!" His voice carried over the mayhem, desperate and dangerous. But the men were dragging her away. She caught fragments of their words. "The boss wants her alive. Teach Santoro a lesson." The last thing she saw was Marco's face, transformed by a fury that promised violence as the Ricci family's men pulled her into the night. They'd found Marco's weakness after all, and now she was paying the price. The cold seeped through Isabella's thin blouse as she huddled in the corner of the dimly lit room. Her wrists ached from the rope binding them, the rough fibers digging into her skin. The concrete floor beneath her offered no comfort, only adding to the bone-deep chill that had settled in during her hours of captivity. Voices drifted through the heavy metal door, gruff, unfamiliar Italian that she could barely understand. The Ricci men moved like shadows beyond her prison, their presence a constant reminder of her desperate situation. "Marco won't negotiate," one voice said clearer than the others. "He never has." "He will for her," another responded with dark amusement. "You didn't see his face when we took her." Isabella closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. The memory of Marco's expression haunted her. that flash of raw fear she'd glimpsed before they dragged her away. She'd never seen him afraid before, not even when dealing with his most dangerous enemies. What did that mean? Her thoughts drifted to Alessandra, hoping the girl was safe. The piano lesson seemed like a lifetime ago now, those peaceful moments when music filled the air and Marco watched from the shadows. How had she gone from being a simple piano teacher to a pawn in this dangerous game? A crash somewhere in the building made her jump. The guards outside her door grew quiet, then erupted in urgent whispers. Isabella strained to hear, her heart pounding against her ribs. More sounds followed, distant at first, then growing closer. Gunshots, shouts, the unmistakable sound of violence. "He's here," she whispered to herself, hope and fear warring in her chest. The guards outside her door were moving now, their boots heavy on the concrete floor. Orders were being shouted in Italian, the words too fast for her to catch. But she understood the panic in their voices. The violence drew closer. She could hear the distinct sound of bodies hitting walls, of bones breaking, of men screaming. Marco was coming, and he was bringing hell with him. Isabella pushed herself to her feet, stumbling slightly as her numb legs protested. The sounds outside grew louder, more intense. A body slammed against her door hard enough to make it shake in its frame. Then silence fell. Heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. The door exploded inward with such force that it nearly came off its hinges. Marco stood in the doorway, his expensive suit splattered with blood, his eyes wild with a fury she'd never seen before. Behind him, the hallway was littered with bodies, the men who had taken her, who had thought they could use her against him. He moved toward her with predatory grace, his gaze sweeping over her, cataloging every mark, every bruise. When he reached her, his hands were surprisingly gentle as they worked at the ropes binding her wrists. "Did they hurt you?" His voice was rough, dangerous, a barely contained storm of violence. Isabella shook her head, unable to find her voice as his fingers traced the rope burns on her wrists. His touch was fire against her cold skin, and she couldn't stop trembling. Marco's control seemed to snap. He pulled her against his chest, one hand tangling in her hair while the other wrapped possessively around her waist. His heart thundered against her cheek, matching the frantic pace of her own. "Never, ever leave me again," he growled, his voice raw with emotion. The drive back to the Santoro estate was silent, tension crackling in the confined space of Marco's luxury sedan. Isabella sat beside him, wrapped in his suit jacket that smelled of gunpowder and his expensive cologne. Her wrists still burned from the ropes, but it was Marco's presence that consumed her attention, the white-knuckled grip he had on the steering wheel, the muscle ticking in his jaw. When they arrived, Marco dismissed his men with a sharp gesture. He guided Isabella through the marble halls, his hand pressed firmly against her lower back. The touch wasn't gentle. It was possessive, desperate, as if he needed the constant reminder that she was really there. In his study, Marco poured himself a drink with trembling hands. The crystal decanter clinked against the glass, betraying his usually steady composure. Isabella watched him from where she stood near his massive desk, noting how the moonlight streaming through the window cast shadows across his face, highlighting the dangerous angles of his features. "You need to leave." His voice was hoarse, raw. "Tonight. I'll have arrangements made." "No." Isabella's response was immediate, firm. Marco's head snapped up, his eyes dark with barely contained fury. "This isn't a discussion, Isabella. You saw what happened tonight, what my enemies are willing to do. I'm not afraid." She took a step toward him, chin raised in defiance. "You should be." The crystal glass shattered against the wall, making her flinch. Marco ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his breathing heavy. They took you to get to me. They'll do it again. And next time... Next time? What? Isabella closed the distance between them. You'll come for me again, like you did tonight. His laugh was bitter, broken. You don't understand what I am, what I do. The blood on my hands. I understand perfectly. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his cheek. He went still under her touch, like a predator caught off guard. I've seen your violence, Marco. I've seen your darkness. But I've also seen how you love Alessandra, how you protect what's yours. Isabella? Her name was a warning on his lips. I'm not some delicate flower that needs to be sheltered. I chose to stay, even after I saw what you were capable of. I chose this. I chose you. Marco's control seemed to splinter. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. You don't know what you're asking for. The things I've done, the things I'll continue to do. I know exactly what I'm asking for. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to back down. I'm asking for all of it. The danger, the violence, the protection. You. Something dark and hungry flashed in his eyes. His grip tightened, not enough to hurt, but enough to hold her in place. Once you're mine, he warned, there's no going back. I don't share what belongs to me. I don't let go. I don't want you to let go. The words had barely left her lips when Marco's mouth crashed down on hers. The kiss was brutal, possessive, everything she'd expected from a man like him. His hands tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss as he backed her against his desk. Isabella matched his intensity, her fingers gripping his shirt, pulling him closer. All the tension, all the unspoken desire that had been building between them for weeks poured into that kiss. Marco kissed her like a man starved, like he was trying to brand himself onto her very soul. And Isabella let him, knowing that this moment marked a point of no return. Isabella stood at the window of Marco's study, watching the guards patrol the perimeter of the Santoro estate. Their presence had doubled since her kidnapping, dark figures moving with military precision through the manicured gardens. The security measures were suffocating, cameras tracking her every move, armed men shadowing her steps, even during Alessandra's piano lessons. You can't keep me locked in here forever, she said without turning around, sensing Marco's presence as he entered the room. His footsteps were silent on the thick carpet, but she'd grown attuned to the way the air changed when he was near. I can, and I will. His voice was low, dangerous, until every last threat is eliminated. She turned to face him, taking in his appearance. He'd loosened his tie, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal powerful forearms. Even now, days after her rescue, tension radiated from his body. The incident had cracked something in him, unleashed a possessiveness that bordered on obsession. I need to go home, Marco. I have other students, responsibilities. Cancel them. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, crowding her space. You'll teach here. Only Alessandra. Isabella lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. You can't dictate my life. I'm not one of your soldiers to command. His hand shot out, gripping her waist, pulling her against him. No, you're much more valuable than that. His other hand came up to cradle her face, the gesture at odds with the steel in his voice. You're mine to protect. I'm not a possession, she whispered, even as her body betrayed her, leaning into his touch. Everything in my world belongs to me, Isabella. His thumb traced her bottom lip. My empire, my family, my enemies. His eyes darkened. And now you. She pushed against his chest, creating space between them. This isn't healthy, Marco. You can't control everything. I can try. The words were simple, matter of fact. I've already lost too much. Alessandra's blindness. His jaw clenched. I won't lose you too. You're not losing me. Isabella softened her voice. But you can't keep me in a gilded cage. I need my freedom. Marco's expression hardened. Freedom? He laughed without humor. There's no such thing in my world. Every moment of freedom is bought with blood and vigilance. He turned away, pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter. Isabella watched the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the glass too tightly. She understood his fear. It was the same fear that had driven him to become the ruthless man he was, the fear of losing what he loved most. Let me prove to you that I can take care of myself, she said. I'm not helpless. Marco set down his glass with deliberate care. You think you can handle yourself against trained killers? Against men who would torture you just to see me break? He spun around, his eyes blazing. They took you from under my nose once. Never again. Isabella stepped forward, placing her hand on his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her palm. Then teach me. Show me how to defend myself, but don't lock me away. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, consideration, and then a dark sort of pleasure. You want me to teach you? Yes. She met his gaze steadily. I want to be strong enough to stand beside you, not hide behind you. Marco's hand covered hers where it rested on his chest. His other arm snaked around her waist, drawing her closer. Beside me? His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You don't know what you're asking for, Isabella. I do. She tilted her face up to his. I'm not afraid of your world anymore, Marco. I'm not afraid of you. His grip tightened possessively. You should be. He bent his head, his lips brushing her ear. You're mine now, Isabella, and I'll never let anyone hurt you again. Isabella's fingers traced the piano keys, but no music came. The grand room felt different today, heavier, more oppressive. Through the tall windows, she could see Marco's men moving with unusual urgency across the estate grounds. Something was wrong. The door burst open, making her jump. Marco stormed in, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Behind him, two of his most trusted guards dragged a struggling man she recognized as Antonio, Marco's head of security. Tell her what you did. Marco's voice cut through the air like ice. When Antonio remained silent, Marco grabbed him by the throat. Tell her how you sold us out to the Rossis. Isabella's blood ran cold. The Rossis, the rival family responsible for Alessandra's blindness. I had no choice, Antonio choked out. They have my family. Marco's laugh was hollow. And now I have you. He released Antonio, who crumpled to the floor. Isabella, come here. She rose from the piano bench, her legs shaking slightly. As she approached, Marco pulled her behind him, positioning himself between her and Antonio. Your betrayal put everyone I care about at risk, Marco continued, his voice deadly calm. The Rossis know our security protocols, our safe houses, our escape routes. He drew his gun, the metal gleaming in the afternoon light. They know about Isabella. Antonio's eyes darted to her, filled with genuine remorse. I'm sorry, I never meant... Silence. Marco's command cracked like a whip. The tension in the room was suffocating. Isabella could feel Marco's rage radiating off him in waves, barely contained beneath his controlled exterior. She placed a hand on his arm, feeling the corded muscles rigid with tension. Marco, she whispered, but he shook his head. They're coming, Antonio said quietly. Tonight? They'll hit all your properties simultaneously, but their main target... His eyes flickered to Isabella again. Marco's finger tightened on the trigger. Where? The old warehouse district. They have a compound. The crack of gunfire split the air. Antonio slumped forward, a red stain spreading across his chest. Marco lowered his weapon, his face expressionless. Get rid of him, he ordered his men. As they dragged Antonio's body away, Marco turned to Isabella, his eyes softening fractionally. Pack a bag. You're leaving. What? No, I'm staying with you. This isn't up for discussion. He gripped her shoulders. The Rossis want to destroy everything I care about. They'll use you to break me, just like they did with Alessandra. Where's Alessandra now? Already secure. I moved her the moment I discovered the betrayal. His hands slid down her arms, leaving trails of heat through her sleeve. But they know about you. About what you mean to me. Isabella's heart thundered in her chest. What do I mean to you, Marco? Instead of answering, he pulled her against him, his kiss desperate and possessive. When he finally released her, his eyes were dark with something that looked like fear. You're everything, he growled. That's why they'll try to take you. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window they could see cars approaching the estate. Not the usual black SUVs of Marco's men, but sleek vehicles that moved with predatory intent. They're early. Marco's voice was ice again. He drew his phone, barking rapid orders in Italian. The estate erupted into controlled chaos, men taking positions, weapons being distributed. Marco, please! Isabella grabbed his arm. Don't send me away. I won't hide while you're in danger. He studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. No, he said finally. You won't hide. But you'll stay by my side where I can protect you. His hand cupped her face. And then I'm going to destroy every last one of them. The sound of gunfire erupted outside. Marco pulled Isabella close, his body shielding her as bullets shattered the windows. Glass rained down around them as he guided her toward the door, his gun already drawn. Stay close, he ordered. Whatever happens, don't leave my sight. Isabella nodded, her heart racing. This was Marco's world. Violence and power, loyalty and betrayal. And now it was her world, too. Glass crunched under Isabella's feet as Marco guided her through the chaos of the Santoro estate. Gunfire erupted in staccato bursts, bullets whizzing past them like angry wasps. Marco's body remained pressed against her, shielding her from the worst of the violence. Stay low, he ordered, his voice hard as steel. They crouched behind an overturned mahogany table, its polished surface now scarred with bullet holes. Isabella's heart thundered in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Marco's men moved with military precision, taking positions throughout the mansion, the air filled with shouts in Italian and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Through the chaos, Isabella caught glimpses of unfamiliar faces, Rossi soldiers, their eyes cold and determined. When I move, you move, Marco whispered, his breath hot, against her ear. Don't hesitate. His free hand found hers, squeezing once before letting go. An explosion rocked the west wing of the mansion. The force of it rattled windows and sent artwork crashing to the floor. Marco's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening with rage. They're trying to flush us out, he growled. He pressed a small handgun into Isabella's palm. Do you know how to use this? She nodded, wrapping her fingers around the grip. The weight felt foreign but necessary. Point and shoot. Don't touch the trigger unless I plan to use it. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. That's my girl. 3 of Marco's men appeared at his side, their suits dusty but their weapons ready. They spoke rapidly in Italian, gesturing toward the garage. Marco nodded, his expression grim. "They've surrounded the estate," he told Isabella. "But they don't know about the tunnel system beneath the garage. We're going to make them think we're cornered, then hit them from behind." Isabella's grip tightened on the gun. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay alive." His eyes bore into hers. "And trust me." More explosions rocked the mansion. Through the smoke and debris, Isabella could see figures moving. Rossi soldiers advancing through the destruction they'd created. Marco's men engaged them, the sound of gunfire becoming deafening. Marco pulled Isabella close as they moved through the mansion, staying in the shadows. His movements were precise, lethal. 2 Rossi soldiers appeared around a corner. Marco dispatched them with brutal efficiency before Isabella could even raise her weapon. They reached the garage, where more of Marco's men waited. The air was thick with tension and the metallic scent of blood. Isabella could hear heavy footsteps above them, the Rossis closing in. "Get the tunnel entrance open," Marco commanded. His men moved quickly, revealing a hidden trap door beneath a false panel in the floor. Isabella felt Marco tense beside her. Through the garage windows, she could see more cars arriving, sleek black vehicles that screamed danger. A tall figure emerged from one, his silver hair catching the fading sunlight. "Vittorio Rossi," Marco spat the name like poison, finally showing his face. Isabella remembered the stories, how Vittorio had orchestrated the attack that blinded Alessandra, how he'd tried to destroy everything Marco held dear. Now he was here to finish what he'd started. The tunnel entrance opened with a metallic groan. Marco's men disappeared into the darkness below, taking up positions for the ambush. But Marco didn't move toward the tunnel. His eyes remained fixed on Vittorio, calculating and cold. "Marco?" Isabella touched his arm. "We need to go." "No." His voice was ice. "This ends tonight. No more running, no more games." He turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Are you with me?" Isabella met his gaze steadily. This was his world, violent, dangerous, unforgiving, but it was her world now, too. She'd chosen this path the moment she'd fallen for him. "Always," she said. The garage doors exploded inward in a shower of metal and glass. Rossi soldiers poured through the opening, weapons raised, but Marco was ready. His men emerged from their positions, catching the attackers in a deadly crossfire. Isabella raised her weapon, standing firm beside Marco as chaos erupted around them. Through the smoke and gunfire, she could see Vittorio Rossi advancing, his face twisted with malice. Marco's hand found hers one last time, squeezing gently before letting go. "Stay close," he commanded. Then he stepped forward to meet his enemy, ready for the final confrontation that would decide all their fates. The mansion lay in ruins around them, smoke curling through shattered windows and bullet-riddled walls. Bodies of Rossi soldiers littered the marble floors, their blood seeping into the expensive carpets. Isabella stood in the midst of the destruction, her hands trembling but her spine straight as steel. Marco emerged from the smoke like an avenging angel, his suit torn and bloodied. A cut above his eye dripped crimson down his face, but his eyes burned with triumph. At his feet lay Vittorio Rossi, the man who had caused so much pain, now nothing more than a broken figure on the cold floor. "It's done," Marco said, his voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. He crossed the room to Isabella, his steps measured but urgent. His men moved efficiently around them, securing the perimeter and dealing with the aftermath. Isabella watched him approach, her heart pounding. The gun in her hand felt heavy now, unnecessary. She'd used it twice during the fight, protecting Marco's flank when Rossi's men had tried to circle behind him. The memory of pulling the trigger made her stomach turn, but she didn't regret it. Not when it meant keeping him alive. "Are you hurt?" Marco's hands were on her immediately, checking for injuries. His touch was gentle despite the violence still lingering in his eyes. "Isabella, tell me you're not hurt." She shook her head, letting the gun fall from her grip. It clattered to the floor as her fingers curled into the lapels of his ruined jacket. I'm okay, Marco." His forehead pressed against hers, his breath coming in harsh pants. The adrenaline was still coursing through both of them, making everything sharper, more intense. "I could have lost you," he whispered. "When they breached the garage, I thought—" "But you didn't," she cut him off. "I'm here. We're both here." Marco's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the brutality she'd witnessed from these same hands just minutes ago. "You stayed," he said, wonder creeping into his voice. "Through all of this, you stayed." Isabella met his gaze steadily. "Did you think I wouldn't? Anyone else would have run, should have run." His eyes searched hers, desperate and hungry. "But you picked up that gun. You fought beside me. I love you," she said simply, the words falling from her lips like they'd always been there, waiting to be spoken. Marco went still, his hands tightening fractionally on her face. For a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade away. The shouting of his men, the crackling of small fires, the distant wail of sirens. There was only this. Only them. "Say it again," he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, Marco Santoro." Isabella's fingers moved to trace the cut above his eye, gentle but unflinching. "Your world, your darkness, your light, I love all of it. All of you." A sound like pain escaped him, and then his mouth was on hers, desperate and consuming. He kissed her like a dying man finding salvation, like a warrior claiming his prize, like a man finally allowing himself to feel everything he'd kept locked away. When they broke apart, Marco's eyes were blazing with an intensity that took her breath away. "I love you," he growled, the words seemingly torn from his very soul. "God help me, Isabella. I love you more than my own life, more than my empire, more than my revenge. You've become everything to me." His arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest. She could feel his heart thundering beneath her cheek, matching the wild rhythm of her own. Despite the destruction surrounding them, despite the blood and violence that had brought them to this moment, Isabella had never felt safer than she did right now, in the arms of this dangerous man who loved her. Marco's lips brushed her temple, his voice dropping to a possessive whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "You're mine, Isabella. Now and always, you're mine." Isabella found Marco in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across his face as he stared out the window. The events of the past few days had left their mark on him, new lines around his eyes, tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "You're avoiding me," she said, closing the door behind her. Marco didn't turn around. "I'm protecting you. By pushing me away?" Isabella moved closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "That's not protection, Marco, that's fear." His shoulders stiffened. "You don't understand what's at stake." "Then help me understand." She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see his reflection in the window. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're running." Marco turned then, his eyes dark with something that looked like pain. "You saw what happened today, what I'm capable of. The violence, the blood, that's my world, Isabella. And every person who gets close to me becomes a target." "I knew what I was getting into," she said softly. "Did you?" His voice was harsh. "Did you know that every time you walk through those doors, someone might be watching? Planning? waiting for the perfect moment to use you. Against me? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. Rossi's men almost got to you today. If I had been a minute later. But you weren't. Isabella took another step forward. You were there. You protected me. I can't always be there. The words exploded from him, echoing in the quiet room. Don't you see? Everyone I've ever loved becomes a weakness that my enemies can exploit. First Alessandra, and now… He cut himself off, turning away. Isabella's heart skipped at the implication in his unfinished sentence. Now me? Marco's silence was answer enough. Look at me, she demanded. When he didn't move, she crossed the distance between them, placing herself directly in his line of sight. Marco Santoro, look at me. He did, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions, fear, desire, anger, and something deeper that made her breath catch. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. Not because you push me away, not because of the danger, not because of anything. I've seen your world now. I've seen the violence and the darkness. And yes, it scares me sometimes. But you know what scares me more? She reached up, her hand cupping his cheek. The thought of walking away from this, from you. Marco's hand caught hers, his grip almost painful. Isabella. No, she cut him off. You don't get to make this decision for me. I choose this. I choose you, with all your darkness and danger, because I've also seen how you love Alessandra. I've seen the tenderness you try to hide, the way you protect what's yours. And I want to be yours, Marco. His control seemed to crack, something raw and vulnerable crossing his face. You don't know what you're asking for. I do. Isabella stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. I'm asking for all of it. The good, the bad, the beautiful, and the brutal. I'm not afraid of your darkness, Marco. I'm not afraid of you. His free hand came up to tangle in her hair, his touch conflicting between gentle and desperate. You should be, he whispered. God help me. You should run as far from me as you can. Then why aren't you making me? She challenged, tilting her face up to his. Why aren't you forcing me away? Because I'm selfish, he admitted, his voice rough. Because the thought of you leaving tears me apart inside. Because every time I try to push you away, all I want is to pull you closer. Marco paced his study like a caged animal, his usual composed demeanor cracking under the weight of his internal struggle. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, catching the silver in his dark hair. Isabella watched him from her position by his desk, her heart aching at the visible torment in his movements. I can't keep doing this, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. Pretending that I can keep you separate from everything else. It's not working. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. What are you saying? He stopped pacing, turning to face her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Every morning I wake up thinking about you. Every decision I make, every move I plan. You're there, in the back of my mind. Do you know how dangerous that is in my world? Marco, no, let me finish. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I've built this empire on cold calculation, every choice perfectly planned, every risk carefully measured. But you… He let out a harsh laugh. You make me want things I shouldn't want, make me consider changes I never thought possible. Isabella took a step toward him, but he held up a hand, keeping her at bay. What things? A different life. The words seemed to cost him something to say. One where I don't have to watch every shadow, where I don't have to worry about you becoming collateral damage in someone else's vendetta. You mean leaving all this behind? Isabella gestured to the opulent room around them, to all the wealth and power his position commanded. Marco's eyes met hers. dark and intense. I've never wanted to change before, never saw a reason to. This life, it's all I've known, all I thought I needed. He moved closer to her, his presence overwhelming. But watching you with Alessandra, seeing how you bring light into our darkness, it makes me want more. Isabella's heart thundered in her chest. What kind of more? A legitimate business? A clean start? His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle. A future where I don't have to hide you in the shadows, or worry that every person you meet might be plotting to use you against me. Can you really walk away from all this? Isabella asked, leaning into his touch. I've already started making arrangements. The admission seemed to surprise even him. Moving assets, establishing legal businesses, creating a path out. It won't be easy or quick, but... He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. But I want to try. For you. For us. Isabella's eyes widened. You've been planning this? Since the night they took you. His jaw clenched at the memory. I realized then that I couldn't have both. This life and you. And the choice. He drew in a shaky breath. The choice was easier than I expected. Marco. She reached up, covering his hand with hers where it still rested on her cheek. I want to build something new, he continued, his voice growing stronger. Something legitimate that we can share openly. No more hiding, no more shadows. I want to give Alessandra a future free from the violence that took her sight. And I want to give you the life you deserve, one where you don't have to fear every knock at the door. Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. What's your plan? I've been quietly transferring control of the legal businesses to trusted associates. The rest... He shrugged, a gesture so unlike his usual calculated movements. The rest will be dismantled or sold off. It will take time, and it won't be without risk, but I have enough influence to make it happen. And then? A small smile, rare and genuine, curved his lips. Then we start fresh. Somewhere new where my name doesn't carry the weight it does here. Where we can just be Marco and Isabella, not the Mafia boss and his woman. The hope in his voice, the vulnerability in his expression, it made Isabella's heart swell. This was the man she'd glimpsed beneath the cold exterior, the one who loved his daughter fiercely, and who, despite everything, wanted to be better. When do we start? She asked, determination replacing her tears. The weight of Marco's empire pressed down on him as he stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study. His reflection stared back at him, the perfectly tailored suit, the rigid posture, the cold mask he'd worn for so many years. Behind him, Isabella waited silently, her presence both a comfort and a torment. Everything I've built, he said, his voice low and rough. Every piece of power, every connection, every drop of blood spilled, it's all led to this moment. He turned to face her, his dark eyes intense. Walking away means leaving myself vulnerable. My enemies will see it as weakness. Isabella took a step forward, her chin lifted in that defiant way that had first caught his attention. You've already started the process. The legal businesses are secure. What's really holding you back? Marco's jaw clenched. Fear. The admission cost him. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders. Not of my enemies, but of failure. Of not knowing how to be anything other than what I am. You're already more than just the Mafia boss, Isabella said softly. I've seen it. Alessandra has seen it. The way you love her, the way you protect what's yours, that's not going to change just because you leave this life behind. He moved to his desk, running his fingers over the smooth wood. I've made calls today, set things in motion that can't be undone. His voice carried a weight of finality. The last pieces of the illegal operations will be dissolved or sold off within months. But there will be resistance. From who? Some of my own people. They won't understand why I'm walking away. He looked at her then, his gaze softening. They don't see what I see when I look at you. The possibility of something clean, something real. Isabella crossed the room to him, her heart pounding. I'm not asking you to become a different person, Marco. I fell in love with you, all of you, even the darkness. She placed her hand over his where it rested on the desk. But I want us to have a future where we don't have to look over our shoulders every minute. Marco's other hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from years of violence. You make it sound so simple. It won't be simple, she admitted. But I'll be there, every step of the way. Even when it gets ugly, when my past comes calling, especially then. She leaned into his touch. I'm not some delicate flower that needs protecting, Marco. I chose this, chose you, knowing exactly who you are. He studied her face for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail. I've already arranged for the transfer of the remaining legitimate businesses into a new holding company. Clean money, clean operations. His thumb traced her cheekbone. We'll need to leave the country for a while. Let things settle. What about Alessandra? She comes with us, of course. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She's been asking about music schools in Switzerland. Isabella's eyes widened. Switzerland? I have property there, connections to some private banks. It's a good place to start fresh. His expression grew serious again. But, Isabella, you need to understand, walking away doesn't erase what I've done, who I've been. I know. She reached up, covering his hand with hers where it still rested on her cheek. But it changes what you'll be, what we'll be together. Marco's other arm slid around her waist, pulling her closer. I never thought I'd find someone who could make me want to change everything. His voice was rough with emotion. Someone worth risking it all for. So risk it, she whispered. Take the chance. Build something new with me. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease slightly. I've already made the choice, haven't I? The moment I started moving assets, started planning for a way out, I chose you, chose us. Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. Yes, you did. Then let's do this properly. His grip on her tightened possessively. We'll dismantle what's left of the empire piece by piece. Build something legitimate in its place. Something worthy of the future I want with you. Isabella stood at the window of their Swiss chalet, watching snowflakes dance against the backdrop of the Alps. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the pristine landscape, so different from the urban shadows they'd left behind. 6 months had passed since they'd left their old life, and sometimes it still felt surreal. Behind her, she heard Marco's familiar footsteps. His presence filled the room, still commanding even without the weight of his former empire. He'd traded his tailored suits for casual wear, though he wore them with the same natural authority. Alessandra's lesson went well? He asked, coming to stand behind her. His hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steady. Very well. The new conservatory is perfect for her. Isabella leaned back against his chest. She's flourishing here, Marco. Away from everything. He hummed in agreement, his thumb tracing circles on her shoulder. The business transition is almost complete. The last of the old connections have been severed. There was a hint of tension in his voice, but no regret. Isabella turned to face him, studying the man who'd changed so much, yet remained essentially himself. The dangerous edge was still there, but tempered now, controlled. He'd channeled his strategic mind into legitimate ventures, his protective instincts into securing their new life. Any word from Giovanni? She asked, referring to his former second-in-command who'd helped facilitate their exit. "He's handling the final arrangements. Everything's clean now, Isabella. Legitimate." He cupped her face in his hands. "Though I still have moments where I reach for a weapon that isn't there." She covered his hands with hers. "Old habits die hard. But you're doing amazingly well, Marco. The way you've adapted, how you're helping Alessandra adjust. It's different," he admitted. "Solving problems without force. Being normal." His lips quirked. "Though I doubt anyone would call our life normal." They'd settled into a routine that blended their old and new lives. Marco still maintained strict security, but it was subtle now. Their home was fortress-like but beautiful, designed to protect without imprisoning. Alessandra had her music, her studies, and for the first time, real friends at the conservatory. Isabella moved to the kitchen, Marco following. She started preparing coffee the way he liked it. Some habits from their previous life were worth keeping. "The local business community seems to have accepted you," she noted. "They respect success and discretion. Two things I excel at." He leaned against the counter, watching her with that intense gaze that still made her heart skip. "Though I think they're more impressed by you. The talented musician who's charmed everyone at the cultural center." She smiled, handing him his coffee. "It's nice to teach again, to have students besides Alessandra, to share music without—" She trailed off, remembering the tension of those early lessons in his estate. "Without wondering if I'm lurking in the shadows?" His tone was teasing, but his eyes were serious. "I did watch you, you know. Not just because I was suspicious, but because you were beautiful when you taught. You still are." Isabella felt her cheeks warm. Even after all this time, he could affect her so easily. "I'm glad we found this place. This life." She gestured to the window where they could see the mountains. "It's peaceful." "Peace," Marco mused, setting down his coffee. "I never thought I'd want it, never thought I could have it." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. "But you changed everything, Isabella. Made me want something different, something better." She rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warming them both. In the distance, they could hear Alessandra practicing her scales, the notes floating through the house like a gentle reminder of how far they'd come. "You made it possible," she whispered. "You had the courage to walk away." His arms tightened around her. "For you, for us." He tilted her chin up, his dark eyes intense with emotion. "You're mine, forever." The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of their mountain retreat as Isabella prepared for another day of teaching at the conservatory. The peaceful routine they'd built over the past months felt almost dreamlike compared to their turbulent past. But peace, as they'd learned, was often fleeting. Marco burst through the door, his face tight with tension. "They found us," he said, his voice carrying that old edge of danger. "The Rossetti family, they're demanding a meeting." Isabella's heart stuttered. The Rossetti family, the ones responsible for Alessandra's blindness, the same ones who had once held Isabella hostage. They were supposed to be finished, their organization dismantled during Marco's final act of vengeance before leaving his old life behind. "How?" she whispered, her hands gripping the kitchen counter. "Giovanni warned me. They've been tracking us, waiting for the right moment." Marco's eyes were dark with fury, but there was something else there too. Fear, not for himself, but for her. "They want to meet. Both of us." Isabella straightened her spine. "Then we meet them." "Isabella," Marco started, his protective instincts flaring. "No," she cut him off. "We face this together. I'm not the same woman they held hostage, Marco. I'm stronger now. Because of you." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms. "They could hurt you. After everything we've built here? They won't." She pressed her hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "You taught me how to be strong. Let me prove it." The meeting was set for that evening in a neutral location, a private room at an upscale restaurant in the nearest city. As they drove there, Isabella watched Marco's profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel. He was sliding back into his old self, the dangerous Mafia boss who'd ruled through fear and power. "Remember who you are now," she said softly, placing her hand on his arm. "We're different people." His expression softened slightly. "You changed me, Isabella. Made me want to be better. But if they threaten you—" "They won't," she repeated, more firmly this time. "We're stronger together." The restaurant was elegant, discreet, perfect for potentially volatile meetings. Marco's hand stayed at the small of her back as they were led to the private room, his touch both protective and reassuring. Inside, 3 members of the Rossetti family waited. Isabella recognized Vincenzo Rossetti, the patriarch, from photos in Marco's files. His eyes were cold as they assessed her, likely wondering what had made the notorious Marco Santoro abandon his empire for a piano teacher. "So," Vincenzo said, his voice like gravel, "the mighty Marco Santoro, living in the mountains like a retired businessman. How domestic." Marco's posture remained relaxed, but Isabella could feel the coiled tension in him. "State your business, Vincenzo. We both know this isn't a social call." "No," Vincenzo agreed. "It's about respect, honor. You destroyed my family's operations, Santoro, left us in ruins, and then you just walked away, started playing house with your piano teacher." Isabella felt Marco's fingers twitch against her back, but she stepped forward before he could speak. "If you're here for revenge," she said, her voice steady, "you should know that Marco left that life behind for a reason, not out of weakness, but strength." Vincenzo's eyes narrowed. "And what would you know about strength, little piano teacher?" "I know that real strength isn't measured in violence or control," she replied, holding his gaze. "It's measured in the courage to change, to choose a different path. Marco had that courage. Do you?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Marco moved closer to Isabella, ready to protect her, but she stood her ground. This was her moment to prove that she wasn't just the woman Marco had chosen. She was his equal partner, strong enough to face their past alongside him. Vincenzo studied her for a long moment, then let out a harsh laugh. "Now I understand," he said, looking at Marco. "She has more steel in her spine than half your old captains." Marco's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "She's the reason I changed," he said simply. "The reason I chose a different life." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their mountain home, casting warm light across Isabella's face as she sat at her piano. Her fingers danced across the keys, playing the same melody she had once taught Alessandra. Marco watched from the doorway, his expression soft with love and pride. The past few months had transformed their lives. After the confrontation with the Rossetti family, word had spread through the criminal underworld that Marco Santoro wasn't just retired. He was untouchable, protected not by violence but by something far more powerful. Love had changed him, and that change had become his greatest strength. Isabella finished her piece and turned to find Marco approaching her. He moved with that same predatory grace, but his eyes held only warmth now. "That was beautiful," he said, sitting beside her on the piano bench. "Just like you." She leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. "I was thinking about Alessandra. She's doing so well at her music school. Marco nodded, pride evident in his features. Because of you. You gave her more than just music lessons. You gave her confidence, hope. We both did, Isabella corrected him, running her fingers over the keys. You learned to be the father she needed, not just the protector. Their new home, nestled in the mountains far from their old life, had become a sanctuary. The security was still there. Old habits died hard. But it was subtle, unobtrusive. They had built something beautiful here, something worth protecting. I never thought I could have this, Marco admitted, his voice low. Peace, happiness, a real family. Isabella turned to face him fully. You always had it in you, Marco. You just needed someone to believe in you. He caught her hand in his, pressing a kiss to her palm. You saw past the monster everyone else saw. You weren't afraid to challenge me, to push me to be better. I saw you, she said simply. All of you, the darkness and the light. And I chose both. The sunlight caught the diamond on her finger, sending sparkles dancing across the piano keys. Their wedding had been small, intimate, just family and their closest friends. Alessandra had played the wedding march, her fingers sure on the keys despite her blindness, her smile radiant as she helped unite the two people who had changed her life. Marco pulled Isabella to her feet, leading her to the window. Below, their garden bloomed with late summer flowers, a riot of color against the green mountain backdrop. This was their world now. Beautiful, peaceful, but no less passionate than their old life had been. Sometimes, Marco murmured, wrapping his arms around her from behind. I wake up thinking this is all a dream, that I'll open my eyes and be back in that cold, dark world. Isabella leaned back against his chest. It's real, my love. We made it real. They had faced down their demons together. The Rossetti family's surrender had marked the end of their old life, but it was their choice to walk away that had truly freed them. Marco had discovered that real power wasn't in controlling others, but in mastering himself. And Isabella had found strength she never knew she possessed. You know what I love most about our new life? Isabella asked, turning in his arms. What's that, cara mia? That we chose it. Every day we choose each other, choose this life we've built. It's not about fate or circumstances, it's about us, making this decision together. Marco's eyes darkened with emotion. This was the man only she got to see, vulnerable, loving, completely open with his heart. The dangerous Mafia boss was still there, would always be part of him, but now it was tempered by love, by purpose beyond power and control. The sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing them both in golden light. They had weathered the storms, faced down their enemies, and emerged stronger. Their love hadn't just survived, it had transformed them both, created something new and beautiful from the ashes of their old lives. Marco pulled her close, his lips brushing her ear. I'll love you until the end of time. And together they walked into their new future, hand in hand, knowing they were unstoppable. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.